Donnelly, Daniel Teggett, Joseph Murphy, Edward Doherty, John Laverty, Joseph Corr, and John McCurr, who were killed in Ballymurphy in August 1971, entirely innocent. On behalf of successive governments and to put on the record in this House, I would like to say sorry to their families for how the investigations were handled and for the pain they've endured since their campaign began almost 5 decades ago. No apology, Mr. Speaker, can lessen their lasting pain. I hope they may take some comfort in the answers they have secured and in knowing that this has renewed the government's determination to ensure in future that other families can find answers with less distress and delay. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Good.
Mr. Speaker, I strongly associate myself with the earlier part of the comments that the Prime Minister made. Can I raise something slightly different, though? It's nearly 4 years since the Grenfell Tower tragedy claimed some 72 lives, yet hundreds of thousands of families still live in unsafe, unsellable homes, and many leaseholders face crippling debts through no fault of their own. Trident Point, Pearmain House, Amber Court, all in my constituency. Given this was the biggest building scandal in modern UK history, why did the Prime Minister order his MPs to vote down our efforts yesterday to get this scandal sorted once and for all?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I in no way underestimate the suffering of those who, the victims of Grenfell, and also those whose buildings, whose homes have been prejudiced by the spectre of unsafe materials. And that's why we provided an unprecedented £5 billion of investment. And I can tell him also that the most dangerous cladding is already gone or is going from all high-rise buildings, and we certainly agree that leaseholders should be protected from remediation costs, and people in high-rise buildings will pay nothing to replace their unsafe cladding.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will understand that Havering, just like Hillingdon, is located on the outskirts of London and has very different needs and aspirations from those in the core area of the city. My borough still prides itself as part of Essex, and I know that his does as part of historic Middlesex. And whilst we need cooperation on things like transport, will he accept that it is time for wholesale reform of the way London and the wider region are governed, and support my campaign to allow boroughs like Havering to take back control from the Mayor and City Hall interference, allowing Havering and indeed all Outer London boroughs the freedom to make their own decisions that best meet the needs of local people?
Well, I can understand the feelings of frustration that the people of Havering may feel about a current Mayor of London who does not understand the needs of Outer London, who has not invested in Outer London in the way that a previous Mayor did, who I seem to recall set up the Outer London Fund and drove through many other benefits for the outer boroughs. But I must tell him in all candour that what we need to do is work together to ensure that the glad day returns when we have a Mayor who truly represents all Londoners, Mr. Speaker.
Now comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the Prime Minister's comments on the Ballymurphy inquest and the sentiment behind them? Does the Prime Minister agree that the single biggest threat to hitting the June 21st date for unlocking is the risk of new variants coming into the UK?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly think that that is one of the issues that we must face, but perhaps it would be for the benefit of the House if I update the House on where we are, because we've looked at the data again this morning, and I can tell them, the House, Mr. Speaker, that we have increasing confidence that vaccines are effective against all variants, including the Indian variant, to his point. And I want particularly in this context to thank the people of of Bolton, of Blackburn, many other places who've been coming forward in record numbers, Mr. Speaker, to get vaccinated, to get their first jabs and their second jabs, Mr. Speaker. I think the numbers have doubled in Bolton alone, and I think the people of this country can be proud of their participation.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I think that's a yes, that the risk of other variants coming through our borders is one of the biggest threats to unlocking. We're not just talking about the Indian variant, we're talking about future variants. In those circumstances, why on Monday did the Prime Minister choose to weaken travel restrictions by moving 170 countries or territories to the amber list?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have one of the strongest border regimes anywhere in the world. There are currently 43 countries on the red list, Mr. Speaker. But if you're coming from an amber list country, everybody should know that if you travel to an amber list country for any emergency or any extreme reason that you have for doing so, when you come back, Mr. Speaker, you not only have to pay for all the tests, but when you come back, you have to self-isolate for 10 days. We are invigilating it, and people who fail to obey the quarantine can face fines, Mr. Speaker, of up to £10,000.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I think everybody would agree that having moved 170 countries to the amber list, absolute clarity is needed about the circumstance in which people can travel to an amber country. Yesterday morning, the Environment Secretary said people could fly to amber list countries if they wanted to visit family or friends. By the afternoon, a government health minister said nobody should travel outside Britain this year, and travelling is dangerous. The Prime Minister said that travel to amber countries should only be where it's essential. By the evening, the Welsh Secretary suggested some people might think a holiday is essential. The government's lost control of the messaging. So can the Prime Minister answer a really simple question that goes to the heart of this? If he doesn't want people to travel to amber list countries, if that's his position, he doesn't want them to travel to amber list countries, why has he made it easier for them to do so?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that after more than a year of this, I think that the Honourable Gentleman would understand that what the public would like to see is some effort to back up what the government is saying, to deliver clarity of messages. And on his point about legal bans, as he knows, we're trying to move away from endlessly legislating for everything and to rely on guidance and asking people to do the right thing. And it is very, very clear, Mr. Speaker, you should not be going to an amber list country except for some extreme circumstance, such as the serious illness of a family member. You should not be going to an amber list country on holiday, Mr. Speaker. I can imagine he wants to take a holiday, but you should not be going to an amber list country on holiday, Mr. Speaker. And if you do go to an amber list country, then, as I say, we will enforce the 10-day quarantine period, and if you break the rules, you face very substantial fines.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, that completely swerves the question. The point was, if it's only in extreme circumstances, the Prime Minister's word, why make it easier to go? If it's extreme circumstances, why make it easier to go? And, Mr. Speaker, let's test it by looking at the consequences. Since the government loosened travel restrictions, 150 flights a day are going to amber list countries, and travel agents are reporting surges in holiday bookings to those countries. Prime Minister, this isn't just a coincidence. It's because of the messaging. So can the Prime Minister tell the House how many people are now travelling to and from Britain from amber list countries every day?
Prime Minister.
What I can tell the House, Mr. Speaker, is that there has been a 95% reduction in travel of any kind to and from this country, and that is exactly what you would expect in the circumstances of this pandemic. There are 43 countries on the red list, and if you come back from one of those countries, you have to go immediately into hotel quarantine. And the reason that we're able to move forward in the way that we have is because, as I have told the House repeatedly, we are continuing with the fastest vaccination rollout, I think, just about anywhere in Europe. And as of today, 70%, Mr. Speaker, of the adults in this country have been vaccinated. And I think that is a fantastic achievement, and that is enabling us to make the progress that we are.
Keir Starmer.
That's an I don't know. And the suggestion that in the last few days there has been a 95% drop-off in travel to amber-list countries, Prime Minister, I don't think holds water. And I'm trying to understand the logic of the government's position. We know that new variants are the single biggest risk to unlocking. We know that the government doesn't think people should travel to amber-list countries save in extreme circumstances. But the government's made it easier to do so. The messaging is confused and contradictory, and as a result, Prime Minister, this week, many people are now travelling to amber-list countries, but the government can't say how many or when. Mr. Speaker, we're an island nation. We have the power to stop this. Why doesn't the Prime Minister drop this hopeless system, get control of our borders, and introduce a proper system that can protect against the threat of future variants of the virus?
Prime Minister.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, I think what would be helpful, I've set out the position about amber-list countries, I think, very clearly, at least twice. Wouldn't it be great, Mr. Speaker, to hear the right honourable gentleman to backing it up for a change, using what authority he possesses to convey the message to the rest of the country? Actually, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the Labour position on borders, it's hopelessly confused. Last night, I think the Shadow Home Secretary said that they wanted to cut this country off from the rest of the world, Mr. Speaker. Pause all travel, even though 75% of our medicines and 50% of our food actually come from abroad, Mr. Speaker. And it was only recently that he was saying that quarantine was a blunt instrument and he'd rather see alternatives.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is just wrong again. We've called for a blanket hotel quarantine for months. I raised it here 3 times at Prime Minister's questions. The government ignored it every time, and look where we are now, talking about the Indian variant. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's former adviser had this one right. He said the government's border policy was a joke. Our borders have been wide out open pretty well throughout the pandemic. There was no hotel quarantine system in place until February this year, but that's not true. Flights are still coming in from India, and even as the variant is spreading, the Prime Minister decides now is the time to weaken the system even more. It's ridiculous. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to raise the appalling rise in anti-Semitism in the last week, and the attacks and the violence we've seen. On Saturday, a rabbi in Chigwell was hospitalised after being attacked outside his synagogue. Many of us will have seen the appalling incident in Golders Green, and the Community Security Trust report a 500% rise in anti-Semitic incidents since the outbreak of violence in Gaza and Israel. Now, I know the government is working on this, and both the Prime Minister and I have condemned these anti-Semitic attacks and violence. But we will all know across this House that Jewish communities remain very anxious. So what more does the Prime Minister think can be done to provide the extra support and protection needed to reassure Jewish communities at this really very difficult time?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share his horror at the outbreak of anti-Semitic incidents, and the government has conveyed that message loud and clear to those who are responsible for enforcing the law against hate crime of that kind. But obviously we will continue to work and to support the Jewish community in any way that we can, particularly working with the Community Safety Trust, who do an absolutely outstanding job in my view, but also showing as a country and as a society that we will call this out at every stage, Mr. Speaker. We will not let it take root. We will not allow it to grow and fester. And in welcoming his remarks, I may say I think it's one of the most important changes of attitude, or U-turns, I should say, that I've seen from the Labour Party in recent times. And I'm delighted that he's taking that attitude. I'm delighted that he's taking that attitude now. But I think what this country what this country wants to see, Mr. Speaker, is a government that gets on with delivering on the people's priorities, making everybody safe. And it might have been a good thing, Mr. Speaker, if he had voted and he's got his party to vote for tougher sentences against serious and violent sexual offenders, to say nothing of people who commit hate crime.
I think, in fairness, this House is very united and will remain united. And, of course, we do support the CST. Let's come to Mary Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My second AstraZeneca jab reinforced my confidence, not only in normal life resuming, but also in the future of our life science industry. In Cheadle and across South Manchester and the Cheshire Life Science Corridor, investment in R&D and innovation will bring high-skilled, well-paid jobs. Will the Prime Minister join me in recognising and endorsing the work of our Northern universities, NHS trusts and life science sector, who, together with the Northern Health Science Alliance, are piloting health tech initiatives which will take us forward from jabs to jobs?
Yes. Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend who is a great advocate for the people of Cheadle, and as part of our plan to move from jabs to jobs, I'm delighted to say that over £1 billion worth of government-funded science and innovation projects are currently taking place across the North West, thanks largely, or at least in part, to her advocacy.
Let's go to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his comments on the Ballymurphy inquest. Mr. Speaker, as a member of Scotland's crofting community, I understand just how disastrous a Brexit trade deal with Australia, as proposed by this Tory government, be for Scotland's farming and crofting sectors. If reports of this Tory deal are true, farmers will lose their livelihoods, rural businesses will collapse, and ultimately families will be driven off the land. And let's be very clear, if that happens, this UK Tory government will be solely responsible. So just for once, Prime Minister, give a straight answer to these farming and crofting families who are living with this threat. Can the Prime Minister categorically rule out that his government is prepared to sign up to a trade deal that will at any future point guarantee tariff-free access to Australian lamb and beef? Yes or no?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the Right Honourable, but I'm delighted to see the shots of his croft, by the way, the humble representative of the crofting community. May I say that I don't think that he does justice to crofters, to farmers across the country and in Scotland as well, Mr. Speaker, because I think he grossly underestimates their ability to do great things with our free trade deals, to export Scottish beef around the world, Mr. Speaker. Why doesn't he believe in what the people of Scotland can do, Mr. Speaker? Why is he so frightened of free trade? I think there's a massive opportunity for Scotland and for the whole of the UK, and he should seize it and be proud of it.
Going back to Ian Blackford. Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was quite chilling. To try and treat something as serious as this in the way that the government and the Prime Minister has done is really quite pathetic. The fact that the Prime Minister couldn't give a straight answer will send a real chill across Scotland's farming communities. The UK government led the betrayal of Scottish fishing, and now the Tories are planning to throw our farmers and crofters under their Brexit bus. This morning, Martin Kennedy, President of the National Farmers Union Scotland, told ITV that farmers will feel seriously betrayed by these proposals. This deal would be the final nail in the coffin for many Scottish crofters and farmers. It will end a way of life that has endured for generations, Prime Minister. I know that many of the Prime Minister's Tory colleagues privately agree with me and want him to pull back from this deal. So will the Prime Minister finally listen, think again, and ditch a deal that will send our farmers down under?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I really think, well, first of all, he's totally wrong about what he says about the fisheries, because, in fact, there are massive opportunities for fisheries for the whole of the UK as we take back control of our territorial waters. And that will be the same for Scotland and around the UK. And I think, again, he is grossly underestimating the ability of the people of this country, the agricultural communities of this country, the farming industry, to make the most of free trade. This is a country that grew successful and prosperous on free trade, on exporting around the world. Our food exports are second to none, Mr. Speaker. He should be proud of that. He should be celebrating that. And all he does, Mr. Speaker, is call for us to put up the drawbridge and go back into the EU to be run by Brussels. That's his manifesto, and I think the people of this country have decisively rejected it.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. North Staff's YMCA in my constituency undertakes fantastic work transforming the lives of young people locally in the Stoke-on-Trent community, and I am delighted that they have been recognised for their work through the Queen's Award for Enterprise. There is no better example of levelling up in action, and I would like to invite the Prime Minister to join me in congratulating all the staff, volunteers and partners of the YMCA in North Staffordshire, and I look forward to showing him levelling up in action when he next visits Stoke-on-Trent, the new second home of the Home Office.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend very much, and she's totally right, and it's part of our levelling up. We're absolutely determined to do this as fast as we possibly can. Thank you for my honourable friend's message about it this morning. We are sending not just back offices, Mr. Speaker, but some of the most important departments of state will be run from around our great cities and towns in the whole of the UK, and I believe that will have a dramatic effect on levelling up across the UK, and I'm thankful to her for her question.
Ed Davey.
Mr. Speaker, local planning reforms introduced by Liberal Democrat ministers have seen communities across England vote for new developments, including new housing, new affordable housing, new community facilities, whilst also protecting the environment and the countryside. So why is the Prime Minister so determined to push through his planning reforms that will do nothing to solve the country's real housing crisis, will allow developers to ride roughshod over local communities, and will mean, in the words of his immediate predecessor as Prime Ministers, the wrong homes being built in the wrong places?
Mr. Speaker, he's completely wrong, and he should look at the bill when it comes forward, because we want to protect the green belt, we want to protect our wonderful open spaces. This is a government that understands the value of the countryside and rural Britain, but we also think that young people have been deprived for too long of the ability to get onto the housing ladder, Mr. Speaker, and it's not just in the South East, it's across the country, and that's why we're bringing forward sensible reforms to allow brownfield sites to go ahead.
Andrew Barr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, in giving the Scottish Conservatives their highest ever number of votes in the era of devolution, the Scottish people decided that Scotland would remain at the heart of this newly reinvigorated global Britain. So with that in mind, would the Prime Minister accept my invitation to Stonehaven in my constituency to come and plant one of 120 cherry blossom trees donated by the Sakura Cherry Blossom Tree Trust to celebrate the deep and growing links between our country and that other great trading nation, Japan?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think that such a gesture would be the cherry on the cake of the free trade deal that we've already done.
Paul Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2019, before visiting Wales, the Prime Minister said, "I will always back Britain's great farmers." Now it looks as if he's backing Australia's farmers instead. So will he today keep to his word, really back Welsh farmers and permanently rule out tariff-free access for Australian lamb and beef imports?
Mr. Speaker, I will back Britain's farmers and Welsh farmers in exporting their fantastic lamb around the world. Mr. Speaker, is it not a disgrace that not a single morsel of Welsh lamb has so passed the lips of the Americans in the last 20 years or more, Mr. Speaker? What about China, Mr. Speaker? Has he no ambition for the people of this country or for the people of Wales or for Welsh farmers? I do. This government does, Mr. Speaker. That's why we're getting on with our agenda.
Virginia Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister or Prif Weinidog agree with me that a free port on Anglesey would create much-needed skilled jobs and investment, protect our precious Welsh language and culture, and breathe fire into the nostrils of the Welsh dragon? And will the Prime Minister accept an invitation on behalf of the people of Ynys to join me on a tour of the island to include a panad at the Truck Stop Cafe in Holyhead? John.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it says here that I mustn't express a preference on the location of free ports, and I won't. But she makes an outstanding case, as ever, she is together with our Welsh colleagues, Welsh Conservatives colleagues. I believe she's helping now to apply the Vicks inhaler to the bunged-up nostrils of the Welsh dragon.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Despite the opprobrium which the Prime Minister always seems to seek to heap upon the Scottish National Party, at the Scottish elections 2 weeks ago, the SNP was returned to government with twice the number of MSPs as their nearest rivals in the Scottish Conservatives, securing 48% of the vote, 49% of the seats in a proportional system, and with 51% of voters backing in parties which support an independence referendum in the current term. So if the Prime Minister genuinely believes that his criticisms of the Scottish Government have any merit whatsoever, why does he consider that the Scottish National Party did so well in those elections, while his own party did so badly?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I totally reject what he's just said. I noticed that actually the Scottish National Party did less well than they did previously under Alex Salmond in 2011. I hesitate to point that out to the Honourable Member, but that is the reality. And I think the reason for that is that the people of Scotland, notwithstanding the nationalist approach that he takes, the people of Scotland have been very disappointed by the actual record of the Scottish Government in fighting crime, in improving education and in making Scotland a great place to live and to invest. And that is the failing of which his government is being held to account.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A large part of Salisbury Plain falls in my constituency of Devizes, and I therefore have the honour to represent a lot of serving soldiers and veterans and their families. So my right honourable friend will understand that feelings are running high in Wiltshire about the treatment of British Army veterans of the conflict in Northern Ireland. Can he assure me that legislation will be brought forward in this session to protect veterans from further prosecutions or investigations unless compelling new evidence is brought forward?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the House will have understood from my opening apology how difficult, how complex and how fraught these issues are. But we are committed to introduce legislation in this session to address the legacy of the Troubles in Northern Ireland and to introducing a fair package for veterans as well, and to protect them, as I've said many times before, from unfair, vexatious litigation when no new evidence has been brought forward.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There were no new measures in the Queen's speech to tackle youth unemployment. There are over 500,000 unemployed young people in this country, yet the government's flagship youth unemployment scheme is nowhere near sufficient, only helping around 1 in 25 young people. I and my honourable friend for Blaenau Gwent have already requested a meeting with the Minister to discuss local concerns from training providers and local businesses. So could I ask the Prime Minister what exactly he's going to do to address this and to safeguard the future of a generation of young people in this country?
We're putting very quickly, Mr Speaker, we're putting £2 billion into the Kickstart programme for 18 to 24-year-olds and investing massively in the Restart programme for those who've been longer out of work. But can I also tell them that the businesses I talk to are currently facing shortages of workers in many, many sectors, and we will work flat out to ensure that we get those who want jobs to those who need workers as well.
James Copley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for the support he's already shown for coming forward with an offshore transmission grid, which he knows will help us both to export our surplus offshore wind into the continent and reduce the infrastructure associated with new wind farm capacity. So it's very important to our communities. But there's a question over timing. So given that he's already set out a very ambitious and clear timetable to increasing offshore wind generation, will he now come out with an equally ambitious timetable for delivering an offshore grid?
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is spot on in what he says about the need for an offshore grid, as well as building the fantastic windmills. It's vital that we bring the energy onshore in a way that is has minimal disruption for local communities and enables us to maximise efficiency.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What does the Prime Minister think when he hears Jenny McGee, the nurse who saved his life, say of NHS staff, "We're not getting the respect and now pay that we deserve. I'm just sick of it, so I've handed in my resignation." Surely even he must pause and think, what can be learned from the mistakes of the past year? What Jenny calls the indecisiveness and mixed messages of his government? And will he think again about giving nurses more than an insulting 1% pay rise?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House acknowledges our collective debt to the nurses of the NHS, and I certainly acknowledge my own huge personal debt, and that's why, of all the professions in this country, Mr. Speaker, in very, very tough times, we have asked the Public Sector Pay Review Board to look at an increase in pay for nurses, but in the meantime we have increased starting salary for nurses by 12.8%. We have put in the bursary worth £5,000. We've restored that, Mr. Speaker, as well as £3,000 for extra help. But above all, Mr. Speaker, to all nurses, and I know what a tough year they have had. I know how hard it has been on the front line coping with this pandemic. We have done what I think is the most important thing of all, and that is to recruit many more nurses. There are now about 11,000 more nurses in the NHS today than there were this time last year, and there are 60,000 more, Mr. Speaker, in training, and we are on target to reach our target of 50,000 more nurses in the NHS.
To James Davies.
Following on that theme, Mr. Speaker, patients in England have unfettered access to specialist hospital care anywhere in England, including within world-leading centres of excellence. But my constituents in North Wales have no such automatic choice, with access dependent on restrictive contracts or individual funding requests. So will my right honourable friend do all he can to ensure that healthcare features prominently within the UK Levelling Up agenda?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for his point, and he knows a great deal about the subject. We've worked very hard with the Welsh Government throughout the pandemic, supporting them with £8.6 billion of additional funding through the Barnett formula. But clearly we need to learn the lessons together as we bounce forward from this pandemic.
Justin Matters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now 664 days since the Prime Minister said he had a plan for social care. But the Department for Health and Social Care are advertising at the moment for social care policy advisers to, and I quote, develop proposals for reform. Why do that if there is a plan already? Every day more people lose their life savings to pay huge social care costs, and we can't even get a straight answer as to whether the government have a plan to fix social care. Never mind find out what it actually is. So just tell us, Prime Minister, do you have a plan, yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, yes is the answer, but I mean, the Labour Party junked it in 1990. This is something that for decades politicians have failed to address. 1999, Labour failed to address the plan. They had 13 years in government, Mr. Speaker. I think it was 13 unlucky years for this country. They didn't do it. And this government is going to tackle it. This government is going to finally address the issue of social care. And if they want to support it with their customary doughty resolve, Mr. Speaker, if they want to support it without wibble-wobbling from one week to the next in whatever their policy is, then without changing like weather vanes, which is what they normally do, if they want to support it, if they want to back it, then I'm all ears, Mr. Speaker.
Higginbotham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout this week, businesses across Burnley and Padiham have reopened their doors to customers inside, from Usher and Molly Rigby's to Bellissimo and Real Cinema. Would the Prime Minister join with me in wishing them all the best of luck as they get back on their feet? And does he also agree with me that if we're to support local businesses in the long term, we need to create the environment and the opportunities they need to succeed, and that includes schemes like the Levelling Up Fund and the Lifetime Skills Guarantee?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, that's why we're investing, for instance, £3.6 million from the Getting Building Fund for the development of Pioneer Place. Burnley will also benefit from our High Streets Task Force. But what Burnley and towns across the country need more than anything else is passionate leadership, such as my honourable friend shows in championing their localities and getting the right investment in.
Final question, David Lind.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of Gladys's proposal to close the McVitie's factory in Glasgow's East End, putting at risk up to 470 local jobs. So will the Prime Minister join with me in engaging with Pladis Global CEO Salman Amin and call upon him to rethink these plans, which would definitely unleash economic Armageddon on a very, very fragile part of the local economy?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I think McVitie's have been a proud part of the Scottish economy since 1800, and I know that people at the Tollcross factory, their relatives, will be very concerned about what's happening. I thank him for raising it. I know that conversations are now going on to see what we can do with, I think it's the Turkish company that now owns Vitties, and I know my honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, is meeting the honourable member to discuss the situation.
I'm now suspending the House for 3 minutes to enable necessary arrangements for the next business. Order.